what we learn about in business school in terms of marketing and brand and scale, like it's not at all like that in a small business. Everything's local market. Like you don't learn about those things. So it was just kind of like you had to figure everything out. And I thought I was smart enough to do it. And I mean, I did it, but I definitely like had much more of an ego that didn't play out as well in terms of putting together a small business.
Liz, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. It's very cool to reconnect. We initially met through a CrossFit gym. I won't go into too much detail, but you taught me how to, I think you saw me catch a wall ball on my face, and then you came over and kindly showed me how to do the proper form to do a wall ball. So I'll never forget that. I think we'll touch on that later in the conversation. And today you are the COO of the Arizona Coyotes of the National Hockey League. And I read also you are the first woman and Latina to hold a COO role in the NHL in its 106-year history. Is that correct?
That is correct. And we think across any of the leagues, which is kind of...
That's awesome. Yeah, so we're very lucky to have you. And today we're talking about your career and kind of around the context of an MBA for anyone who might be interested in exploring an MBA. So yeah, if you wouldn't mind, could you give us a little bit of background of like who you are and kind of where you're coming from, I guess, up to the point of your business school experience, and we'll take it from there.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. So let's see, I grew up in born and raised in Santa Barbara, moved to a small town called Lompoc, ended up going to UC Santa Barbara for undergrad. And then I also did a master's at UC Santa Barbara in econ. Post-graduation, went into consulting. And in fact, I didn't know, so I'll tell you, I actually didn't know anything about business school. The way I learned about it was when I was in grad school getting my master's in econ, I found a book called Monkey Business. And I don't know if you've read that book before, but two gentlemen, one was, I think, in advertising, and the other one was in maybe banking. I don't remember. It was or consulting or something like that. And they're both applying to business school. One goes to Wharton, one goes to Harvard. And then they ended up going into working on Wall Street after. And I read the book, or maybe I read part of it because I'm not very good at reading full, like entire books all the way through. But I read part of it and I was like, oh, this is what I'm going to do with my life. So hence why I started a job in consulting post getting my master's in econ. Wasn't the same type of consulting, wasn't management consulting. It was actually litigation consulting. So it was like my bosses were like PhD economists. And so we work on damages cases. And then that turned into finance type consulting, valuation consulting prior to going to business school.
Very cool. And yeah, I think you answered the kind of like question. My initial question was like, how'd you even think of going to business school? So this book, Monkey Business, had a big impact on that. I guess it seeded it in your brain, right?
It did. Yeah.
That it was a option for people. All right. So you did litigation consulting pre-MBA. And so what was there something in particular that you were like hoping to get, like what was your like why MBA? I guess we can even take it to your application when you were applying to business school. Like what did you tell the admissions committees for the schools that you applied to? Like why were you interested in their programs?
Why an MBA? I think I just thought it was something I needed to do. Right. So I guess if you go back to like how I was raised, I was raised by a single mom. And so I think my goal was always to really have a career and be able to make enough money to take care of my mom because she took such great care of me like when I was growing up and did the best that she could do. So I think everything was always just to try to be what I considered to be successful. And so I was trying to figure out what that was. And so every step that I took was more, I think this is what I'm supposed to do. If like, this is something I need to do, right? Like if I want to have a long lasting career and I want to be successful and I want to get to certain places in life, like this is what I need to do. And I probably learned that or thought that just by reading this simple book, right?
Yeah, that's cool. No, I can relate to a lot of that too. Just like, yeah, you want to give back to your parents, to your mom,
care of them as much as you can.
Take care of them. Yeah. Yep, that's right.
You want to make them proud too. I think that was the thing is I just really wanted to make her proud. And so I always wanted, and that being said, yeah, I mean, when I got into schools, I think Harvard was the last one I got into. And when I told her about each other school and I thought they were great schools, she was like, oh, good. Like my mom didn't know anything about business school, right? She was just like, oh, that's great. Well, that's great. And then when I said Harvard, like she lost it. She lost it. It was just the name. And I was like, okay, think I know what I'm going to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I can relate to that. I think like every like Asian kid's mom wants to be able to tell their friends that their kid got into Harvard, whether it's
It
business
was
school or undergrad or whatever it is.
it was the best time of her life. Like even when I graduated, she still was telling people that I went to Harvard. It was like, I'm done. It's 2 years.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so funny. One of my sisters went to Yale, and so like my mom, we'll be at like a family thing, and my mom will talk about me going to HBS, and my sister will be like, "Hello, like, what about Yale? Like, what's
Right.
the deal with that?" That's awesome. Yeah, you made your mom really proud. So you actually going back to your application process. Sounds like you applied to a couple different schools. Um, I always ask everyone like what they wrote about in their applications. I think that's really interesting. I Before starting this post-MBA project, I looked back at my essays and cringed, but also took a lot away from like reflecting on what I wrote 10 years ago.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know more about, your application process and what you wrote in your essays, if you remember.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't remember a lot about what I wrote in my essays. I feel like I remember, so I'm a while, I think I'm before you. So 2007 is when I would have applied. But I remember one about my like my favorite book, and I actually replied, or my answer had because I didn't read a lot. I think I told you that I don't read books fully through. So I said I don't have a favorite book, but I have a favorite movie, and I used Hoosiers because basketball is obviously a theme in my essays. I remember so there was like a little bit of honesty there that I think worked out, and then I spoke a bit about my mom and kind of how I grew up, and just kind of what we were working towards together. That was definitely a big piece of my family story was definitely a big piece of it. And then in terms of like short and long-term goals, it was all based on an experience I had in undergrad. So when I was an intern, again, basketball was like my passion, my love. My favorite movies actually Love and Basketball, just in case you've ever seen it. Amazing movie. I did an internship at the Washington Wizards, and Susan O'Malley was the first female president of an NBA franchise. And so kind of giving that like representation of something that I could do. And so that really inspired me. So in my essays, I said I thought the next step with short-term goal would be go do management consulting for a little while, focus on entertainment with the long-term goal of being president of an NBA franchise. And so to that end, what you just mentioned about being the first Latina COO, what's insane is that our CEO is Latino as well. And it took from when Susan O'Malley, I don't know what year she was president, being the first female president of a franchise, but he was the first Latino president CEO, I think, of any of the 5 professional leagues. And it took 20 years for that to happen. So like talk about representation, right? And I'm sure you could probably think through as well, if you're thinking through, oh my goodness, like think about CEOs and presidents of these teams. Like it has not been very diverse. And so it's just pretty incredible to like think it took that long, right?
Yeah, no, totally. And yeah, your short and long-term goals. So you're touching on them. So your short-term goal was working consulting, entertainment, because I think you had the foresight to understand that these sports leagues are entertainment businesses.
Right.
That's interesting because I didn't realize that till more recently. Been a fan my whole life, but never really thought of it that way.
Yeah.
So you really understood the business. And then long-term goals. What did you say your long-term goals were when you were applying?
Oh,
You
to
had something.
be, I don't know, maybe I got distracted, but it was to be president of an NBA franchise.
Yeah. So you wrote. So you were writing into. You ultimately, did your MBA at HBS at Harvard Business School, and so I can imagine the admissions committee reading your application. They're like, this applicant wants to be the president of an NBA franchise. That's like very
Right.
specific. That's it.
It was very specific. I don't know what other people put in theirs, but I was concerned about being too honest, and everyone says just be you and be unique, and I think that helped, if anything, right? I was honest, and
Yeah.
funny enough, I think I'm actually like working towards that, and a lot of times we don't always like plans change, and you don't always end up trying to pursue what you wrote, right? It's just kind of where you are at that time, and it's just kind of funny to be in that place for me.
Yeah, I think honestly, so having interviewed a couple people like 5, 10, 15 years post MBA now for this project, I think it's rare that someone is so spot on with exactly what their long-term goals were and their short-term goals, because things change so much. And usually when you're doing an MBA, you're still early in your career, so like there's a million options and different paths you can take, and life hasn't really happened quite yet. So,
Right. Right.
it's very rare actually, just from my anecdotal research of doing like 10 of these so far.
I'm still not there yet though, so we'll see.
Yeah, you're pretty darn
15 years
close.
post-MBA, so I guess long term was really long term.
Yeah, I mean, you've got like, if you wanted to, you have at least a few more careers under your belt.
Maybe after, right?
I think so. Yeah. So speaking of, you're pretty darn close. You're COO of, one of the major sports franchises, and you want to be president of a basketball team. So pretty close. But before you got to where you are today, I want to talk about your experience in business school, and then I want to spend time talking about your career post-MBA, because I know you've done a bunch of interesting stuff. But when you think back to Harvard, I guess was like 2007 to 2009, like that era. What are the things that you remember or that kind of like come to mind when you think about your MBA experience?
My section, I think my friends, my favorite class, which was SMICI, which I think is now BEMS. So it was Strategic Marketing and Creative Industries Exchange with Anita Elbers, which gave me, again, like was exactly what I needed, right? Entertainment, sports, to have that class. Like that was by far my favorite class, and really like inspiring just to see all those case studies in entertainment. And then probably Lasso. So I was president of Latino student organization, and that group was just really close to my heart, very special to me. I think it was a group that in a club, and I think it's something that you have to kind of find in school, where it just made me feel like I fit in, right? Like sometimes you enter business school and you in especially a place like Harvard, you're kind of like, did they like accidentally admit me in, or am I really supposed to be here? Was I, everybody always asks, like, am I the mistake? And you question that. I think I questioned myself when I was there, definitely like first semester. I struggled a ton with wanting to talk. I was insecure. And so I think finding like that club really made me feel like I fit in, and really made me like feel like, okay, I deserve to be here. Just having people that I felt like I could talk to. So that was probably my
you mentioned a couple of things that I think like I definitely experienced them. I think a lot of people do, but it's trying to find your people when you're in business school, especially at HBS. It's a huge class. It's like almost 1,000 people, right? So you have to figure out how to navigate that, find your community when you're there in Boston. And then you mentioned I also was very shy in class. I just, that environment is just so unique. One of the most like nerve-wracking experiences of my life. I think I would still feel the same way if I went back now and did a class. I think.
Totally. I did. Well, when I went back for a 10-year reunion, and we sat down with all of our section mates again, and like 10 years post, by the way, my 15 is this year. We went back and I sat down with all of them for like our section like class, and I was like, oh my God, like I'm so nervous again. Like, how I talk all the time. Like, how is this a problem, right? Like it is. It's nerve-wracking.
Yeah, it's quite nerve-wracking. Yeah, it's I want to ask you about your 10-year reunion, your 15-year reunion. But before that, speaking about your time at HBS in your 2 years getting your MBA, it was a unique time in history. It was like great financial crisis, right? 2009 time. So I imagine it's similar to now. I think I hear a lot of like the current MBAs, like MBA candidates that are in their programs right now, first year, second year. Recruiting's tough. So I think it's like similar to probably 2008, 2009. You tell me, but what was your, like, how did you go about recruiting? You were doing, I think you were trying to recruit for consulting firms. So what was that like?
Yeah, so I actually did like consulting and banking. I think, well, maybe I was doing banking. I don't remember actually. That might've been like after, but 2007 was fine. And cause you recruit when you first get there. So as soon as you get on campus, you're recruiting. So 2007 was okay. Things didn't start to happen until later, and they were just kind of unfolding as we were in school, right? Like, I mean, I feel like they were like creating case studies like during that period of time. So getting the internship was great. I think that was pretty normal. So like internships during your summer between years was fine. It was 2009 that was tough, right? So that was when, well, if you wanted banking, you probably weren't going to get it, because bankers that typically went there to then go into PE, they weren't getting the PE jobs, right? So then they were just going back into banking. So there really weren't like banking opportunities. But it's interesting. I think a lot of it is kind of as it was just all unfolding. And I don't think you really realize like, wow, I mean, you realize what was happening, but you're just kind of like, okay, so what am I going to do? Right. I didn't think at that point consulting was for me. So I wanted to go the startup route. And partially that's because of the cases that I worked on during my internship. They weren't exactly entertainment. So I went BCG LA thinking I'd be doing entertainment, and it wasn't exactly what I thought it would be in my essays. So I was looking for like startup jobs in LA, and that was like where I needed to use the network. I would reach out to everyone like in the alumni database, send emails, just have conversations. Every person would take a call for an HBSer. So that was pretty amazing. And just kind of worked the network route the entire way until I found something that I really wanted.
Yeah, I think that's a really great experience to share, because hard times, you have to like do a network search essentially. There's not like a bunch of companies that you're interested in coming to campus and asking you to work for them, especially in 2009. So you did your own outreach, reached out to a bunch of people, landed in a good spot. Yeah. So what did you ultimately do like after business school? Like where did you start your like post-MBA career? Was it in an entertainment startup?
Yeah, it was an entertainment startup. They were funded by a couple of VCs, I believe, or one primary VC. Their focus was, think like direct to DVD direct to DVD like type projects, or films. And so back then, around then is when Netflix was really taking off. So a lot of us growing up, we used to go to Blockbuster and Blockbuster and Hollywood Video. And we would go like on a Friday night with like the family and get popcorn, and you would see all these new releases. And so if a movie didn't go to the movie theater, but it was like there, like in the new release, like you might see it and you might pick it up. Like that was just what you did. You checked the new releases. But then when Netflix came around and Redbox, like they all went bankrupt. And so that straight to DVD model actually got pretty difficult to distribute, because the like user interface on Redbox or Netflix was very different from just walking into an entire store dedicated to new releases, right? But that's where I went. So I was working there for a bit, combined with they owned movie theaters, and so they were trying to be a vertically integrated entertainment company.
That's super cool.
Yeah, and then from there, I loved entertainment, but the venture capital firm that owned them asked me to come on board and work with them. So I thought that would be a really great opportunity to get a little VC experience. And so I ended up working with them for a bit.
Yeah. So you went from like working in a startup, like, as an operator, if you will, and then on the investor side, is that like, what I guess a lot of people want to go into VC like right after business school. What was your experience like, having worked in a startup and then going into VC? I'm curious to know how that influenced or like changed the lens through which you looked at investment opportunities.
Yeah, I don't think it changed the way I looked at investment opportunities. I would say that if anybody wanted to go to VC right after school, I would do it. I think venture capital is an amazing experience. It was more so like the thought process, right? So like when I was working at a startup, I was like, this is great, right? We're running the company. But then I would go to a board meeting and I realized, well, I'm really being directed by a VC company telling us what to do. So then it was like, okay, fine. So then I wanted to work for the VC, like I wanted to be there. But the downside of the VC is, you get to tell everyone. I felt like we were telling people what to do, but we didn't actually get to execute on it. And so that became like very, very difficult for me. Hence why I then decided to have my own startup or become an entrepreneur post VC, which is when I started, Depot, which is where we met.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's really interesting. So you missed that hands-on like ability to influence and drive and grow an operation. And so you're like, okay, VC, I'm going to start my own business. That's a big leap. I want to know how, Depot is, I guess it became a chain, like a several CrossFit gyms, CrossFit boxes. That's what we call them. Right. Yeah, of course, we wouldn't be able to do this conversation without talking about CrossFit. We'll do a transcript count of how many times we mentioned CrossFit in this conversation. But yeah, that's a big leap. And I think unexpected, right? You're someone from HBS, you worked at a startup, you went to a venture capital firm, which is probably like very, I think people wouldn't blink an eye. Your HBS classes, you're doing what, everyone probably expected you to do. I think the CrossFit pivot was probably quite unexpected for people. I don't know.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to know, like, how did you decide that was something you wanted to focus on?
Yeah, so I loved VC. I'll tell you, I think it reminded me a lot of being at school at HBS because I felt like, when you're in school, you get to see all these different cases in all these different industries. And it's just really amazing to kind of apply, I guess, successes in one to something else, right? And I felt like I got a little bit of that in VC because I was always paying attention to what was happening across all the industries that were like things that we focused on, we targeted, right? But sports has always been my passion. Sports is where I wanted to go. And so back in 2009, I don't know, for whatever reason, I thought that CrossFit was going to be the next sport. And I thought it could be as big as, some of these other professional sports, right? And maybe be a league at a certain point. At the time, I think they had actually created a league. I forgot what it was called. It was at the grid, I don't know, something like the grid. They had come up with something. They were trying to create like this team type environment. So I had this belief that that's what it was going to be. So the gym started not because the gym was my first choice. The gym started because I actually created an app. I was creating this app where it was like a competition, but like online. So CrossFit online competition, one-on-one. Because I was going to all these local competitions and I was like, look, like I am like in my mid 30s, late 30s, I am 120 pounds, right? Why am I competing against like a 22-year-old who like has 30 pounds on me, trying to lift the same weight over and over again? Like I wanted to compete against somebody my size, right? So that was the idea behind the app. And I started creating it and I know a lot of startups fail. So if it fails, I'm going to like rely on a gym. Like that would just be like kind of like, that will be what I fall back on. And so I built out this business model of what a gym could do and how well it could do based on another gym that I had went at the time. And being the optimist that I am, I thought it was going to do a heck of a lot better than it did when I first started. So
yeah, how do you start a CrossFit gym? I think your first location was the West LA location.
It was the West LA location. So I actually had helped I went to this other gym and I helped them when they were looking to sell their gym. And so I helped them with their business model. So I had an idea of what the financials look like, made a bunch of optimistic assumptions. I had money saved. I don't come from money by any means. Like I said, this is a very ironic piece of this whole story is that I wanted to have this career to help support my mom. And then I go and I start a gym or my own company, right? And I have nobody to support
much money
me.
on weights and chalk.
Yeah, exactly. So I had something to kind of go off of. I had an idea. I made some assumptions. It was pretty tough. Like it was like trying to figure out what to do when you sign the lease, dealing with like city rules and guidelines with parking and things like that in the city of LA. So we just kind of getting through all of that. And then what we learn about in business school in terms of marketing and brand and scale, like it's not at all like that in a small business. Like everything's local market. Like you don't learn about those things. So it was just kind of like you had to figure everything out. And I thought I was smart enough to do it. And I did it, but I definitely like had much more of an ego that didn't play out as well in terms of putting together a small business.
Totally. Yeah, I can relate to that on, in a different context for higher frame. It's like I'm always challenging myself to figure out like what are some of the things that I learned at HBS that should be applied to what we're doing, and what are some of the things I should pretend I don't know and like remove from my brain, because it's like you can't apply like HubSpot's marketing strategy to which we learned about like in the case study to like a local business, right? It's just not the same thing.
It's not the same. And then I think the scale piece of it, you think you can take this and turn it into 20, and CrossFit gyms, they're very, very local, and having presence is so important. Scaling's tough, right? Especially for that type of business where like you can only, your capacity combined, right? Like you can only have so many people there.
Yeah. I think it's super cool. I've always like admired this about you is that, you do have this on paper, you have like a phenomenal pedigree, right? Is what people would say, like HBS, worked in venture capital. And now you're building this gym, this brand. I think Depot became a great brand and this great community. And but you're in there, like you're in the weeds. I imagine you're doing scheduling. You're trying to get new members in the door. You're coaching classes. You're teaching me. You're coaching me. That's how I met you in the first place. So yeah, I think it's that's super cool. I think that, you rolled up your sleeves and you did that. I think that's what it takes with a lot of like small businesses. And there's different ways that this can show up. Like if you're working in a tech startup, same thing. You got to roll up your sleeves. Maybe it's in a different way, but I've always thought that's really cool. And what you built at Depot is awesome. So I will say it's like the brand was awesome. The community, you built an awesome community. Like I still stay in touch with people from that gym, from the downtown gym. And I think that's really great. And I take away a lot of lessons around community building, but also just like your Depot was the best run CrossFit gym that I've ever stepped foot in. I've stepped foot in dozens all around the country and the world now at this point. And you guys ran a great gym. The coaches were very high quality, just all the small things. I can't really say enough about that experience. So I learned a lot about community building and customer experience from you that I now apply to our business. So I just want to say that Depot is so cool. Yeah, for me.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I'm glad to hear that. It was definitely a passion project as well as like, right. It was something I loved. There's very few industries you can do things where you change people's lives. And I think that's sports, right? And like to be able to do something where like you're helping people is pretty amazing. And I think for sure what it taught me, as difficult as it was, is that, I think we've always known this, right? Is that it's hard to lead without doing yourself. And so I think sometimes if you, in some capacity, like I'm not saying you have to do everything, but like really understanding how to do things, what it takes so you can have proper expectations of your staff and just having done it yourself. And so I think that was like a big part of it was doing that. And then also just kind of knowing if you start to do it and then you can lead in that way and people can follow, hopefully it works out. But it was a good time.
It was a good time. Yeah. So when you were building Depot, you were bullish on the sport and just it growing in LA and enough so that you would there's just an earthquake here.
Oh.
You see that the screen shaking? That was crazy.
Is it?
It's all good.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll jump right back in it.
This is Arizona. This is why you move.
Just safer.
Yeah, we have no natural disasters at all.
What was I saying? No, I wanted to ask you about we talked about perception and that sort of thing, right? Like that's something that I think pros and cons to HBS. One, you go to HBS, like you're perceived as someone who's really hardworking, pretty darn smart, knows a lot about business. But there's also some like challenges with I think perception, maybe when you're doing something a little bit off the beaten path. Did you ever feel like any pushback or any type of way because you were building a CrossFit gym? Maybe some of your classmates were out there building tech companies and working at Google and Facebook and that sort of thing.
I did when I went back for my 10-year reunion. Not pushback. Everyone was like, actually, surprisingly, I feel like everyone was really positive. I think personally, I probably felt a little insecure again, right? Like, oh, I'm just like doing gyms. I own a few gyms, but there are a lot of people that kind of went that route and went small business and did local. And you'd be surprised. And there's so many people at my 10-year reunion that were just like, had the most miserable time in management consulting. And they were like, I am so glad I'm gone from that. And like just doing what you love, like 10-year is a really, I don't know. I have no idea what 15 is going to be like, but coming back for your 10 years is an incredible time because so much reflection. People have had good, they've had bad, they've had, they have family, they have death, they have just things that happen health-wise and then career-wise. And people are just happy to be happy, right? Like, and I think so. Funny enough, like I didn't get that pushback because people were just like very happy to hear you doing something that you like, that you love. I think it was more of a personal thing that I kind of questioned, did I make the right move?
Yeah. Yeah. What is 10-year reunion like? So I have mine coming up in 2 years. So I'm like our 5-year was during COVID, so it was virtual. So I don't think it was like the real experience. So I'm looking forward to 10. What can I expect?
I think I can say you could expect a really great time. I think people are just different from whatever they were, whoever you knew in business school. And I didn't go to my 5-year. I heard that 5-year, but for what I heard is 5 years very much like, this is what I'm doing. Like, just really try to prove yourself still. Like, I'm 5 years out of business school. Here's what I've done. Here's where I'm going. All of those. 10 years, like, it's very little about career. It's more about the people, right? Like, it's kind of like you talk, maybe you say what you're doing, but nobody cares. Like nobody
Yeah.
cares if you left, if you're in between jobs. Like it's just like everyone's there just to kind of be with each other. So it's very, very different from what I understand. Again, I didn't go to 5 either, but very
Yeah.
different than I guess I had expected. Right?
Yeah. That's cool. I'll report back.
Yeah.
Yeah. So kind of transitioning from Depot, like how does the Depot story end, and then take us
Yeah.
to kind of bridge us to where you are today with the Coyotes.
Yeah. So Depot story ending. I tried to get it to a point where I had folks running the gym and I could kind of step away and do consulting. And I was doing a bit of consulting. So I was really just kind of part-time. There's definitely some lost love in that situation because gyms really need, I think, that presence, CrossFit gyms specifically. But it was something that I felt like I had to do. So I started consulting and COVID hit. And so that was a pretty tough time. So all of our gyms in LA shut down. The one up north, I think, had to shut down for, no, actually, they shut down as well. And then in LA, we were able to open back up temporarily. I think it was for like a month or maybe 3 weeks. And then we were shut down again. So overall, it was
Yeah.
shut down for a pretty long time. And so I really was just at that point full-time like consulting, right? And I had one of the companies I was consulting for asked me to come on board full-time. And I'm sorry, they asked me to come on board full-time prior to COVID. So I was working there full-time, then COVID hit. And so I was working at this company called Panavision in LA doing finance and strategic planning. And so kind of back into that like same role almost that I had at Maya, where I was at a startup. And it was comfortable. It was needed. I needed to get back in. And that's one thing I would say is that I have had this interesting career of transitioning from role to role. A lot of it has come through network. It's all been network. I didn't apply for these jobs, right? Like it was more so I knew somebody who got me a consulting project. And then that consulting project turned into a full-time job. And it just kind of like rolled in that way. When I did apply, taking that break with the gyms, I don't think there's a lot of value add in entrepreneurship and small business as well, like what you talked about, because the things that you learn. But I don't know that that's seen when you try to get back in the workforce. It was almost felt like it was looked as like, oh, you took 5 years off. What have you been doing, right?
Yeah. So it's like the marketability of the skills that you developed and the lessons you learned, not quite there. The market's not really valuing those things. That's
So
interesting.
so getting a job after is all about network. Who's going to give you the opportunity because they see your value. And so through consulting, I was able to kind of prove value, right? And the things that I could do. Once you get your foot in the door, I'd also say the other thing that happens when you do that, and like I basically confine myself to this CrossFit world, right? Is like I'm not like I don't really have a network. Like I don't have a network of my network of other CrossFit gym owners isn't going to help me get my next job, right?
Right.
Like and so it was kind of one of those situations where you almost fell off the map for about 4 or 5 years, except for when I was doing consulting projects.
Yeah. No, that's I think that's really interesting. So essentially, you took this like unbeaten path into CrossFit gyms. You're deep into the community there. When you want to transition out of it, right? You had like to use your consulting to kind of get back into the classic business world, I guess you could call it, whatever you want to call it. So that's a really good tip, though, I think, for anyone who's doing a transition, is to find consulting opportunities, right? To get that experience that is similar to kind of the direction you're going.
Yeah, get the consult, and also just try and stay. My advice would be to stay relevant with folks, right? Like stay involved if you can. Stay involved doing other things where you kind of continue to keep that network wherever it is.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess you don't really know what you're going to be doing after. And that's the big question mark too. Like, how do you just kind of get back in, right?
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So I want to jump ahead to your current role with the Coyotes, and it's pretty darn spot on to what your long-term goals were when you were applying to business school. How did you? Yeah, and you talked about how you've been very intentional. You've earned every single job that you've gotten, through the work you've done, through taking shots and finding opportunities. Was it similar for how you landed with the Coyotes?
Yeah. It is. So again, network, right? So when I was at that entertainment company post business school, I met Javier. And we went to lunch and we were talking, and he said the family he was working for was going to buy the Atlanta Hawks. This was 2009. And I was like, great. I was like, if that happens, will you please keep me in mind? Because I don't even know him, right? We weren't working together. I just met him through the job that I was at. And I said, if that happens, please let me know. Keep me in mind. Like, that's my dream job. Well, we did stay in touch. I think I worked on a couple projects for him, maybe through consulting. I've done a lot of free consulting, FYI. That happens. It pays off. Trust me.
Yep.
Where you just help somebody out because you know how to model a business for them. Like, it really doesn't take much time, and it does them a lot of help. And I think it's just good for you for the future, just like I said, for the network. But he called me. He got the job during COVID. He got the job as president and CEO because that ownership group ended up buying the Coyotes, so a hockey team in Arizona, very different from the NBA team in Atlanta. But he called me, and I basically 2 weeks later I put my notice in, and 2 weeks later it was COVID, so we moved to Arizona and we started at the Coyotes.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
That's such a great story. Yeah. I want to highlight something you said. It kind of came in and went in this conversation, but you did a lot of free consulting.
Yes.
Like, that is something that I think we should be screamed at the tops of our lungs. Like, if you're starting a business, if you're just, trying to be helpful, right? And a lot of times it's just doing work just to help someone, right? And that's, in other words, free work, right? Not looking to get paid. You're just trying to help someone. And you've done this a couple times, right? Because you also mentioned how, like, you were helping, how you got into the CrossFit world is like you helped someone prepare all their gym, right? So you're very consistent in how you kind of try to help other people out, and it's paid back for you. It sounds
for
like.
sure. I wouldn't say I do it. Like, I wouldn't say I do it for it to pay back by any means.
Right? Yeah, you just enjoy it.
I don't go into it with the intention of like pay back. It's like, you have a skill set that people need. And like, you also don't want people walking into businesses that they don't quite understand what's happening. Like, I've seen so many startups with people have these wonderful ideas, and they're probably potentially really great leaders, and they know how to motivate. They're visionaries. They probably know how to execute, but they don't understand financials. They don't understand like business unit economics, right? It is just like, the simplest things. And so doing that for them to see like, okay, just like keep in mind, this is how long it could be before you make any money, right? Or helping people in that way has always just been something like I enjoy doing in my free time. It was one of my passion projects. But also like keeps you thinking about new industries and new ideas. It really keeps you, like, it's good for you, right? Like, you're like, oh, I didn't think about this. And you like learn about something new while you're doing it. So he that's how this happened. We stayed connected. He brought me in as chief strategy officer. Again, look, I have zero experience in sports, but I was given that role because of my experience overall and what I could do. And then, like, Javier valued that, right? And he opened the door for me. We need that. Like, we need people to open the door. So if you are going to try and do different things, like, you need somebody to open the door for you. And it's been great. And the experience I've had so far with the Coyotes has been amazing. And then, we've had a lot of challenges. We went through a lot of different things. And so chief strategy officer turned to chief operating officer. And that's kind of where I am right now.
Very cool.
Yeah.
All right, Liz, thanks so much for sharing that. I've got 2 questions here to wrap up because we're coming up on time. But one, I ask everyone. It's an interesting question to ask. I'm curious to know what you think. I think we touched on it a little bit before, but just thinking about the ROI on an MBA, on your MBA. I have to just ask, like, what's the ROI been on your MBA from HBS?
Yeah, I don't know that I've ever really thought about it like that. I guess I don't think about it like that. I just know it was the best decision I could have ever made, right? And the relationships that I built, some of my best friends are from business school, right? Still, like, they're just people you can count on. I mean, I couldn't imagine my life or my career without that experience. So it's not necessarily just financial. It's also just like personally, like, it's just one of the most fulfilling experiences that I had.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. I feel the same way. It's very hard. I think some people can do the calculation. I think it's much more than that. So I'm with you on that. And last, just wrapping up here, you've shared a lot of great insights. I think for people, how to navigate careers, how you got into HBS, but any parting words of advice for, I think, like, the version of you from 2005 and 2006 and 7, maybe applying to business school early in your career, what advice would you give that version of yourself?
Um, Apply what implied you said applying or like
Just
what you're
anyone earlier in their careers, I guess, for anyone watching this, like what other advice, what parting advice would you want to leave with them?
sure. So it's definitely relationships. It's definitely building those, networking, talking to people about what they do and how they got there. These things that you're doing right now, right? These coffee chats are amazing. Just trying to figure out how does somebody get there so they should know there's always a path. At the end of the day, I think there's always a path. If business school is an option, like I would do that in a heartbeat because that network is so important. I think just having that stamp on your resume and somebody sees that might open the door somewhere. But knowing that whatever you want to do, you can get there. You just have to figure out that way, whatever your way is, right? And like I said, I think that these are great for that reason. I'm sure everybody you talk to is just going to have a different story and a different way that they got to where they wanted to be. But most people, I'm sure everyone is where they really want to be at this time.
Totally. Yeah. No, thank you so much, Liz. This has been awesome reconnecting with you. I think it's going to be really awesome for anyone who's interested in pursuing different careers. You've had a bunch and interested in business school. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. And I can't wait to work out again together soon. So let me
Let's
know
do
when you're
that.
in
Yeah.
Phoenix. We're going to
Yeah.
let's see how much you've gotten into it.
Let me know the time. I love that.
You say you're like really into it now, right? I've been
Yeah.
out of it for a little bit post baby, but I'm ready.
All right. Let's do it.
All right.
Thanks, Liz.
Thank you.